because you have this actuality, which is the capacity to speak, you now have an ability or a power to speak, right? So this is both a capacity, what we would call second potency, and an actuality. It's a property. You're a speaking being, a speaking person that allows you to utilize the power of speech. And so I use the image of speech here because it's helpful, but it's actually quite suggestive that this is the first image one is inclined to, because the final cause of human nature is our transfiguration in the image of the divine word or the divine logos. And it is only in speaking that human beings can actually exercise creativity in the world. Right? If you want to make a building, you need to give instructions. You need to be able to express your idea of what that building is supposed to be in symbolic language, such that your idea becomes another person's idea, and you can collaborate and join your powers together in order to bring this idea to fruition. So that whole dynamic is the course of human nature, and it's rooted in something which pre-exists in the life of God. Now, in the life of God, there's no such thing as a first potential, because God is never drawn closer to the final cause of his nature. He doesn't need anything outside of himself in order to be fully God. But God does have what we would call second capacity or second potencies, or what I've called a capacity of power. So because of who God is able to create the world. Something in the life of God allows him or grants him the capacity to do these other things which are contingent. So in the life of God, the utilization of a capacity or power does not make him more fully God, because there's nothing external to him in which he is participating. But the second potency is always related to the nature of the actuality which grants you a capacity, right? So in terms of God's relation to creation, if you just look at the Gospel of John, John speaks of God's creation of the world through the Word and the Son in language which analogizes it to begetting. Now, what does it mean for God to be God? Well, as Christians, we believe that the Trinity is not an accidental quality which belongs to him. God is God in and through the Trinity. The very nature of being is realized and expressed in its union with other subjects. So that's an insight, which is often associated with John Zulus, but I think it's the key to biblical and patristic metaphysics. But what that correspondence suggests is that very principle, which is the relation of the Father to the Son, the way in which they are interrelated and bound together as one God, is then the ground by which God creates a new relation, that is the world, and then continues to relate to the world. So we know God relates to the world through his energies, and the reason is because the world is in some sense external to God, but God is drawing it into himself. So what God does is God makes himself manifest or knowable in relation to the world in a myriad of different ways, so that his presence comes and dwells in the corporeal world that we know. And when he does that, the world is drawn into Christ, who is the paradigm and archetype of the creation to begin with. So I think you can also see this in other scriptural texts. So one would be Genesis chapter 14. Genesis chapter 14, Melchizedek blesses God by calling him the possessor of heaven and earth, but the word actually can also be rendered begetter of heaven and earth. So God is the begetter of the heavens and the earth. In some sense, his act of creation is an icon. It's an image, an expression or symbol of his generation of the Son. And that then explains why it is that God redeems all things through the Son and not through the incarnation of the Spirit or the incarnation of God the Father. It is appropriate that when he comes and dwells in the world and recapitulates it in himself, he do so in the second person of the Trinity, not the first or the third person of the Trinity. And so the language of the energies, I think, really has its biggest payoff in an elucidation of the nature of communion to begin with, because an energy is an expression of a person's nature according to the personal idiom. So the Father is God, that's his nature, and he is the Father. And so the energy is the love that belongs to God expressed in the fatherly mode. And so if you want to think about that, think about, the dynamics in a family. The dynamics of a family, the love that the Father has for his Son is different from and also the same as the love the Son has for the Father. It's the same love, and yet it is expressed in different modes because of the distinct personhood of Father and Son. And then we recognize that the very nature of that distinction pertains to the relation of the two. So the idiom is the relation, and that which is being expressed is the energy, and the energy expresses the nature. So all of that is the ground of God's relation to the world.